Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Travel Tomorrow, a Philippine Department of Tourism, UN World Tourism Organization webinar on travel and tourism recovery. To start our program today, to give her welcome message in behalf of the Philippine Department of Tourism, let's all welcome Secretary Bernadette Romulo Puyat.
His Excellency Zurab Pololikashvili, the United Nations World Tourism Organization Secretary General, Ms. Sandra Carvao, UNWTO Chief of Tourism Market Intelligence and Competitiveness, Ms. Natalia Bayona, UNWTO Senior Expert of Innovation, Digital Transformation and Investment, Mr. Jesper Palmqvist, STR Area Director for Asia Pacific, Mr. Harry Wang, Deputy Director, Regional Department for the Asia and the Pacific, and the entire team of RDAP for its contribution in organizing the webinar, Undersecretary Benito Bengzon of the Department of Tourism, our moderator, Dr. Maria Sheridan Rodolfo, colleagues from the tourism industry, and all of you who are tuned in to this webinar, good day. I would like to thank the UNWTO for partnering with the Philippine Department of Tourism in organizing this webinar on travel and tourism recovery. We are truly honored to be the first member state to engage the UNWTO in this kind of an initiative. Thank you for the opportunity and support you have given us. Today, we are privileged to be with experts who will share with us their valuable insights on how the public and private sectors can work together to mitigate the impact of the coronavirus pandemic and hasten the recovery of tourism. Before the pandemic, Philippine tourism was off to a very good start. In 2019, we welcomed a record high of 8.3 million international tourist arrivals, which was a 15.2% increase from the previous year. January 2020 was still promising as we registered an 8% growth over the previous year. I will not anymore belabor the point on the dramatic shift in tourism with the declaration of the pandemic, but I will dwell instead on our efforts for response and recovery. For the Philippine Department of Tourism, using the principles and framework of the UNWTO, such as those in the published Supporting Jobs and Economies with our private tourism stakeholders, as represented by the Tourism Congress of the Philippines, crafted the Tourism Response and Recovery Program to serve as our master plan for the recovery of tourism in the Philippines. The program identifies the substantial and timely measures moving forward with emphasis on providing for business continuity, protecting jobs, ensuring sustainability, and the resilience of the industry. The Philippines also took inspiration from the UNWTO's Travel Tomorrow campaign in developing our newest campaign, Wake Up in the Philippines, to remind us all that if we stay home today, there is an endless opportunity for us to no longer dream, but to wake up in beautiful destinations when this is all over. As we slowly steer ourselves toward recovery, I encourage everyone to keep moving forward in your own ways. Let us all take this time to immerse in new learnings and available resources that will shift paradigms on how we view tourism. This pandemic is a lesson for us in humility, generosity, and priority setting. We have heard of terms such as future-proofing the tourism sector against the virus, but in reality, this is not the only challenge that we will be facing in the near future. We have to confront as well concerns on climate change and other natural and man-made disasters. So resiliency is perhaps the simple buzzword we must all keep in mind. Recovery must be with resiliency. The words that one of our distinguished guests, UNW Secretary General Zurab Pololikashvili, issued at the height of the pandemic last March 17, 2020, rings true until today. Our Secretary General said, people and their well-being must come first. Tourism is uniquely placed to lead future recovery. Our sector will provide the jobs people need to bounce back and will drive economic growth that will help whole communities and countries to recover. But for now, we must be patient and stand ready. We stand as one, we shall recover as one. Thank you and mabuhay.
To extend his congratulatory remarks for the Philippines in behalf of the UN World Tourism Organization, it is an honor to introduce to you the Secretary General, His Excellency Zurab Pololikashvili.
Good afternoon, dear State Secretary, dear Bernadette. Thank you for your kind words. Dear guests, to all who are participating in this very important and interesting meeting. Unfortunately, it's difficult today to meet each other, and we from UNWTO really miss you, all our Philippine colleagues and friends, but I'm sure that very fast we will recover. And as we call this conference recovery, tourism recovery webinar, we change a little bit the name, and we call it Restart Tourism. As you know, 2-3 days ago, we approved at our crisis committee, which was established from the very beginning. I would say from the first day when pandemic was announced by UNWTO, and yesterday we approved and we issued the final document and final guidelines how we can restart tourism, what are the priorities, guidelines, nice showcases, as the State Secretary mentioned, that we need and we have to see how countries, and we really had very important role, and we have very important role for coordination. Coordination is one of the most important thing today, and I want really to congratulate you on organizing this very important webinar. These are challenging times for all of us, but now is also the time to look to the future, and it's time to restart tourism, as I mentioned, and by extension to make sure that the benefits our sector delivers: jobs, opportunities, economics grow and return as well. It is vital that we restart tourism as we mean to go on, and the steps we take now will be consequence for the future, not just for the future of tourism, but for the future of our societies. As we shall explore today, building resilience and embracing the power of innovation can help us grow back stronger and better. And I think then when we have the presentation of the chief of our innovation and digitalization department, Natalia, will explain that we announced the Healing Solution Challenge, and we received in 1 month more than 1,000 projects. And it was really a very interesting challenge, and we have 1,000 concrete projects which we want then to deliver and to distribute among our member states, and I think that they are really interesting projects which can all use for restart and recovery plan, as we call it. For many years, the Philippines has been a global tourism leader. The sector is supported of many jobs, and it's an important part of Philippine economy. And tourism will return to country, and in fact, in some countries around the world, restrictions on travel are now being eased, and steps are being taken to get tourism moving again. First of all, of course, it was affected European region is most visited region in the world, and it was, I think, it's first time when all world and Europe and European Union was locked. Even we couldn't travel from Spain in neighbor countries. Even we couldn't travel from Madrid to Barcelona last months, but step by step, it was mentioned, countries are opening, they're going to open. We have very positive feelings, and we're very optimistic that very soon borders will be open, and I'm sure that tourism will restart and recover very fast, because it has this ability, possibilities, and I think this kind of networking and this kind of meetings always are very useful to know what countries are doing, and this is mainly our role, to support our member states and to give them ideas how we can recover and how we can restart again tourism. And I'm confident this will soon be the case in the Philippines, and our job now is to make sure that we are ready. Only this way can equality and sustainability be at the heart of the tourism of tomorrow. I want to thank again to all organizers, all our friends, all our colleagues, all participants, and those who are joining us today. And I look forward to an interesting discussion as we work together to restart tourism, and wish you good luck, health, first of all. And again, many thanks, and it's an honor to participate in this very important meeting. Thank you very much.
And now we turn you over to our moderator, who will provide the overview as well as to introduce our speakers. She is an adjunct faculty member of the Asian Institute of Management, or AIM, and Board of Advisors of the AIM Andrew Tan Tourism Center. Let's all welcome Dr. Maria Cherilyn Rodolfo.
This afternoon's webinar, #Travel Tomorrow, aims to explore realistic and workable measures to aid the speedy recovery of our tourism sector. After all, tourism's recovery is also our nation's recovery. So for this afternoon, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Sandra Carvao, the Chief of the Tourism Market Intelligence and Competitiveness of the UNWTO. Sandra Carvao is Chief of before 2018, Sandra was Chief of Communications and Publications for 8 years until May 2018, where she was responsible for UNWTO strategic positioning. Prior to this post, Sandra was Deputy Chief at UNWTO's Market Trends, Competitiveness, and Trade and Tourism Services Department between 2007 and 2010. During this period, Sandra coordinated the Tourism Resilience Committee created by the UNWTO to address the impacts of the global economic crisis of 2008 and 2009 on global tourism. Let us all welcome Ms. Sandra Carvao. She presents the impact of COVID-19 on global tourism and mitigating the socio-economic impact of the pandemic to aid recovery. Sandra?
Hello. Good afternoon from Madrid. Good morning here for us. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today watching in the different channels. I want to thank the Philippines Department of Tourism for the invitation and the opportunity to share with you what we're seeing around the world in terms of the impact, but also as we start seeing some easing and some positive signs, how we see recovery moving forward. I would ask our kind technicians if they could share my presentation on the screen. Thank you so much. As I mentioned, I'd like to give you first an overview of how COVID-19, which we all know it's an unprecedented crisis, economically, socially, apart from obviously the huge impact it's having on human lives, but tourism is actually at the center of that impact. We have around the world a situation which is unseen. We have probably not even during the World War, we had borders literally closed at 100% of the destinations in the world. As you can see in the map, that has been a situation that emerged from the mid of March, and now we are at the end of May, beginning of June, and actually for the first time since then, we are seeing some positive signs. UNWTO latest research released last week shows that we have 3% of destinations slightly showing some openness, which obviously it is a gradual process, but it's a very positive sign considering that for over a month we have been in a total lockdown. If I can have my next slide. What does this mean for international tourism? If we look back into the results of the first 3 months, and those are international tourist arrivals reported by countries, we already lost 22% of all the traffic around the world just in 3 months. And those 3 months were only affected in many countries February and March. Obviously, Asia and the Pacific was the hardest hit region already in February, considering that the region felt the impacts of COVID earlier than others. But then this wave, unfortunately, expanded to all over the world. And if I can have my next slide, we can see that the international tourist arrivals by region show that Asia lost 35% of their tourists in those 3 months. Europe around 19%, but we'll probably see the curve deepening in April and May. Next slide, please. So this means that in 3 months only, the world has lost almost 80 billion in exports, the tourism exports that are generated by international travel, and that we had almost 70 million people less traveling. And again, we need to take this into perspective. We're just talking here about 3 months. Next, please. As we move forward, the challenges of doing any forecasting with the uncertainty that the situation implies are obviously very significant. From UNWTO's intelligence area, we have developed 3 different scenarios, and I would like to stress those are scenarios, they are not forecasts. And those scenarios are based on 3 possibilities. The first one, and hopefully is the one that we're starting to see, is that there will be a gradual opening of borders and lifting of travel restrictions in the beginning of the month of July. We have seen many countries announcing already they're opening up. Spain, for example, Italy has started to open up to international travel within the Eurozone today. So if this is the case and we continue to see this positive trend, our scenario points that still international tourists would be down by around 60% towards the end of the year. We can't forget that even with an opening, it will be a gradual opening, and we will need to see also how consumers react to this, and also what's the capacity that's back in the market in terms of airlines and in terms of accommodation. If the opening would take place later in September, then we might end the year at -70%, and later, even in the year, we might lose 80% of all traffic, which hopefully is not a scenario that we can probably see now. Next slide, please. So what does this mean? It means that at least around 850 million tourist arrivals will be lost this year. And more important, and both the Secretary General and the Secretary of the Philippines mentioned the issue of the impact on people's lives. This means that more than 100 million direct tourism jobs, and I'm only talking about the direct numbers, are at risk in our industry. Next, please. So if we look a little bit further, and it is unparalleled, as I mentioned, but often we can learn from past crises. It's important to know that globally, if we look at the 3 main crises that our sector has suffered in the past, the SARS epidemic, the September 11 attacks, and the global economic crisis of 2008, we see that the sector, and I'm talking globally in international terms, took around 11 months to 19 months to go back to pre-crisis levels. Obviously, this situation has never been seen because SARS was a crisis that hit mostly Asia and North America. September 11 did have an impact, but mostly on the Americas. And you do see that it took 14 months to go back to previous levels. And the global economic crisis, which was then compared also, if you think 18 months to actually go back to normal. So I think it is important in building our scenarios that we can take this into consideration. Next, please. So what does this mean for Asia? And I think this is an important point. Unlike Europe, traffic in Asia doesn't have such a peak in the summer months, although there's an extra demand in summer, our summer in the Northern Hemisphere. So the months of July, August, and September, there is a significant level of travel the rest of the year. So hopefully, if we start seeing opening processes in July and August, probably Asia is better positioned to recover traffic than other regions where most of the travel will take place in July, August, and September, like is the case of Europe, for example. Next slide, please. So one of the points that we always like to mention as well is the importance of tourism for small island developing states. And in the case of the Philippines, although it's not the case of the country itself, many of the smaller destinations are very highly dependent on tourism. And this is where it's important, as we open up and the conditions allow for it, always with the necessary precautions, to actually develop specifically oriented either travel corridors or recovery processes for island destinations that can actually recover much of the loss that they're feeling at this moment. In most of the cases around the world, you can have islands where actually over 80% of their GDP or their exports comes from tourism. So it is important to have that targeted approach. Next, please. Another point that has come up in most of the discussions, obviously, as countries start to open, is that domestic tourism will be the first to recover because people, first of all, will feel comfortable within their own destinations. Proximity travel, travel that allows you to drive. And this is how the distribution of guests in hotels and establishments in domestic and international market is. And I think it's important because often in the past, domestic tourism has been seen as a buffer, but in times of crisis, and we've seen it in the past, in times of crisis, domestic market is always a pillar of recovery. So it is a good moment to actually look at the domestic market with new eyes after COVID-19. Next, please. If I can have, yes. So what are the challenges and opportunities that we have as we go forward? Obviously, the sector has proven its resilience in the past. We are sure there are many pent-up demands that is very, very eager to return to travel. Domestic tourism, as I mentioned, can be a very important pillar in that recovery. And our sector is also shown to be a sector which is very flexible in adaptation because of our structure. So if you think about how quickly most of the countries and the private sector has come up with adaptation protocols, how they are focusing their marketing and their promotion to the closer markets. So I think that strength will play in favor of the sector. We've also seen an impressive amount of government support to the sector. UNWTO has a monitoring system that weekly updates what measures governments are implementing. And we see that from loan schemes to support schemes and training and maintaining jobs. There's been an immense amount of support by governments. So obviously there are also some threats. We don't know how the economy will recover, how consumers will react when things start to open. And obviously we don't know what the impact will be in demand. But there's opportunities, as it was mentioned. It's a big opportunity to rethink our business models in terms of the community engagement, in terms of sustainability, but also in terms, and my colleague Natalia will surely dwell into this issue, in terms of the technological transformation. And it's also, as we stop, a moment to reskill, to actually create a workforce that is ready for the challenges that might come in the future, and actually that we progress in adapting our models of governance in the sector itself, having more coordination between the public and the private sector, but also among the different public institutions. I think the crisis has brought to life the need that different government levels engage. For example, health, interior, transport, tourism, all need to work together. And I think this crisis, if anything, has brought that need for coordination much stronger. The same with different levels of government at local and national level. So I think that hopefully going forward, this is a lesson we can take from this crisis. If I can have my next slide, please. So I'd like to share with you very briefly, just before we go into the questions, what UNWTO has been doing at global level to support the sector. The Secretary General mentioned that from the outset, UNWTO has created a crisis committee. And actually, for the first time, we had representatives from all the relevant public sector, like WHO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, and the private sector. So we had the IATA, we had WTTC. For us, it was really an important point to actually make sure there is a coordinated effort and vision on the crisis. So coming out of the committee, UNWTO has issued a series of recommendations for recovery, which is a very simple guide with 23 areas that countries can look into, while they not only mitigate the impact in the short term to support businesses and jobs, but also prepare for recovery and for the future. If I can have my next slide, please. Also, UNWTO has, as it was mentioned, just launched now in a second phase our priorities for the restarting moment and the recovery as we move forward. Obviously, it's still critical to ensure that businesses survive and that jobs are protected. But there is an important point moving forward, which is how do we recover the confidence of consumers? And that can only be done through safety and security, very clear communication on what is being implemented, very transparent information on the situation on the ground, all that done in full collaboration with the private sector, with the necessary health authorities so that borders can be open with responsibility, and that there are also harmonization of the protocols, because consumers need to have that safety that when they go to one destination or to another, they can expect the same level of safety and security. And then, as Natalia will probably explain later as well, it's a great opportunity to start working on changing our gears into a more value-added human resources sector. We know we're a labor-intensive sector, but we also know there is a challenge of informality in our sector. There's a challenge of the level of training. So it is an opportunity to step up on value-added jobs, innovation, and sustainability. If I can have my next slide. So together with the priorities, UNWTO has launched an overall set of guidelines that we welcome governments to look into and implement together with their own protocols nationally for the specific industries. But always having one thing in mind, and this is the big importance of those guidelines. We're looking at the consumer from his eyes since the moment he sits down in front of his computer or using his mobile phone to search for a travel option until the moment he gets back to his home. We need to ensure that the travel journey is safe and seamless the whole way. And many issues arise here, like cancellation policies, transparency in information that consumers need to have at the time of booking, all the need to actually make that journey integrated so the players can share information, obviously with the due respect for data privacy and regulations. But for us, it was very important to make sure that also at the destinations, not just the private companies, but the destinations need to have their own measures in place to ensure consumers they can feel, again, confidence to travel. If I can have my next slide. Can change slide, please. So as I was saying, and I'm not going to dwell into that, the guidelines touch the different industries, but they also touch the issue of destination planning and management, which for us as a UN agency is critical. If I can have my next slide. So finally, just to give you two tools which are available at the UNWTO website, apart from the guidelines where you can have that information, we also have two monitoring tools which we hope can help the sector recover. The first one is a data dashboard where you can see where your country stands in terms of international tourist arrivals in the last months, and month by month see who's opening. And the second one is a dashboard where you can find all the countries' measures to support the sector. So with that, we hope that we can cover three pillars of helping countries recover. One, which is market intelligence. At the end of the day, data needs to guide us to take evidence-based decisions. The second one is the operational component. What are countries doing in terms of recovering tourism? And the third one is moving forward. How do we adapt this new period to the challenges that we have ahead, which were already there? And at the end of the day, this crisis will accelerate them. We can't forget that opening up and recover and traveling tomorrow will mean that we need to prepare today. And we need to prepare today with communities, with travelers, and with the sector. I think those three stakeholders need to be always at the center of this recovery. And with that, I will leave and be open to any questions and happy to share with you any other comments.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for that very interesting and very comprehensive presentation on the impact of COVID-19 on global travel and tourism and the initiatives to accelerate recovery across the various destinations. Now, you showed earlier a slide on the recovery period across various crises that the world experienced over the past decade. What lessons from this crisis can you share, especially to a country like the Philippines?
Well, I think one of the key messages is preparation. I think crisis management needs to be at the heart of any tourism policy. I think it often happens that we think about it when a crisis hits, but then again, we go back to our normal lives and recovery, and we forget that we need to have those mechanisms implemented. And a crisis, obviously, of this nature is unprecedented, but destinations are vulnerable to natural disasters and to other kinds of crises. So it is important to think how, first of all, tourism can be part of the overall coordination mechanisms in the country for crisis. In this case, we have a health situation. So tourism needs to be from the beginning at that table of discussion. And I hope that going forward, this is one of the lessons that we've seen in other crises, and now again that we can learn. I think it's also important to know that, the difference from this crisis compared to the others is we have a lot of data, and big data and technology has changed. It's something that we hadn't available in the previous crisis. So we need to make the most of that information. We need to invest in data-driven systems to understand the market, to see where the green shoots are coming from, who's ready to travel first, which destinations will be favored, what fears of concerns consumers can have. So I think both crisis management systems and data and information would be crucial as we move forward, and hopefully something that we didn't have before and we can make the most now.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. This second and the last question for this session, and then later, after all the panelists have delivered the presentation, we will have a Q&A portion again. You mentioned that one of the pillars of recovery is public and private sector collaboration. So what best practices can you share to all of those listening today? Because we have a number of listeners or watchers who come from different sectors, and we have a multi-stakeholder audience right now.
I think the important thing is that if it doesn't exist yet, that there are mechanisms of public-private sector coordination. So often we see now in the crisis that specific task force for recovery are created, that's already a very positive sign that all the stakeholders can come together, because at the end, it will have to be a collaborative effort. No one can get out of this crisis alone if we don't do it together. But I think if it doesn't exist, it's important that those mechanisms can stay, that they do not exist only for the crisis, but that those kind of task force are always existing in the planning of the tourism in a destination, so that the private sector can be heard. I think as tourism, we always face a challenge, which is we're a very fragmented sector. So it's also important to empower the private sector. So actually that the role of associations and umbrella confederations of the sector can represent the different areas, because we have hotels, we have transport, we have travel agencies. We're a very fragmented sector compared to many others. So it's important to work towards having a strong private sector voice that can be that partner to the governments as well.
Okay. Thank you very much for that response, Sandra. So this crisis actually provides another opportunity to unite the industry, particularly of course, the
Totally.
fragmented industry that you mentioned. Okay, thank you very much, Sandra, and we'll get back to you later after the last panelist has delivered his speech or presentation. Okay, thank you. And I'd like to introduce now our second speaker, Mr. Benito Bengson Jr. He is the Undersecretary for Tourism Development of the Philippine Department of Tourism. Undersecretary Bengson Jr. has a portfolio that includes product and market development, tourism development and planning, research and information management, and public affairs and advocacy. He also serves as the Philippine Department of Tourism spokesperson, and he is always kept up to date by regular consultations and engagement with industry stakeholders. He is guided by more than 3 decades of experience in public service. He also represents the Philippine Department of Tourism in a number of international and regional organizations, including, among others, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, the World Tourism Organization, and the ASEAN National Tourism Organization. Okay, let us all welcome Undersecretary Bengson Jr. He will deliver the topic, resilience of Philippine tourism industry.
Thank you very much, Dr. Twinkle. Philippine Tourism Secretary Berna Romulo Puyat, UNWTO Secretary General Zurab Polo-Likashvili, Ms. Sandra Carvao, Ms. Natalia Bayona, Mr. Jesper Palmquist, Mr. Harry Wang. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, good day. Thank you for this privilege to speak on the resilience of the Philippine tourism industry. Resilience is a word that perfectly describes the tourism industry due to its innate ability to bounce back from various calamities, whether natural or man-made. Resilience is what has kept tourism growing despite the seemingly endless headwinds that have come its way. The pandemic has spared no one, and for a country like the Philippines, whose economy is highly dependent on tourism, this can severely impact on businesses, jobs, and livelihood. Although the challenges may be on a scale we have never seen before, we must remain undaunted and optimistic with the opportunities that lie ahead. We at the Philippine Department of Tourism have precisely taken on a more positive and forward-looking stance amidst the crisis, as we realize that so much is at stake in terms of business continuity, revenue, but most importantly, livelihood, especially at the community level. As the pandemic began to unfold and disrupt tourism activities and traveler movement in March, we immediately took concrete measures to respond to the needs of our tourism stakeholders. The department, together with its attached agencies, were at the forefront in assisting around 37,000 stranded foreign and domestic tourists who were affected by land, air, and sea travel restrictions that were implemented across the archipelago. We mounted sweeper flights, arranged land and sea transfers, facilitated bookings, and made arrangements on behalf of our tourists for border passage. We also provided tourist care vouchers, a one-time cash assistance to our stranded domestic tourists whose air and land tickets were either canceled or rescheduled due to the enhanced community quarantine. We also distributed tourist care kits composed of sanitation and hygiene kits, water, snacks to our distressed passengers and frontliners at our airports. We also created a 24/7 online response team composed of DOT employees who set up workstations at home to be our virtual frontliners. They were able to track tourists who needed help, coordinate with government offices, foreign embassies, airports, airlines, land transportation providers, and accommodation establishments to facilitate the return of foreign visitors to their home countries and domestic tourists to their hometowns. These were solutions designed to meet real-time conditions. We also knew that we had to plan ahead and work on solutions moving forward. And thus, in preparation for the new normal, the department, together with its attached agencies, offered free webinars and online trainings for tourism stakeholders. To date, we have successfully conducted 18 webinars, reaching 268,000 individuals, with 5,420 registering and participating in the virtual training sessions. The department recognizes the importance for its stakeholders to come out of this pandemic equipped with new knowledge and skills to face the evolving tourism industry. We are therefore rolling out 68 more webinars until the end of the year to support the reskilling and upskilling of our stakeholders. Our goal is for the country to be ready to deliver remarkable and above the new normal service when our guests who dream of waking up in the Philippines finally pack their bags and fly to be with us again. At this juncture, allow us to share with you the Wake Up in the Philippines campaign video, which was inspired by the hashtag Travel Tomorrow campaign of the UNWTO. In our goal to make tourism bounce back as soon as possible, we have meticulously crafted the Tourism Response and Recovery Plan, or the TRRP, with relevant national agencies and the private sector. As the UNWTO highlights the importance of putting people first in the midst of this crisis, we crafted the TRRP with our stakeholders first in mind. Through this plan, we aim to protect and ensure employment and business survival, enable the government and private sector to work cohesively towards a sustainable and resilient tourism industry for the future, and to provide policies and guidelines for the new normal. In crafting the plan, we identified 4 pillars. The first, emergency support for vulnerable groups and individuals. The second, expanded medical resources to fight the pandemic and ensure the safety of frontliners. Number 3, fiscal and monetary actions to finance emergency initiatives and keep the economy afloat. And pillar number 4, an economic recovery plan to create jobs and sustain growth. Meanwhile, the plan identifies 6 thematic outcomes to mitigate the effect of COVID-19 on businesses, workforce, and vulnerable groups. These are theme number 1, secured livelihood and adequate social services. Theme number 2, sustained business operations to ensure business survival. Number 3, appropriate infrastructure. Theme number 4, enhanced marketing and product development to restore confidence. Aside from the 4 major themes, the following additional themes will cover cross-cutting issues and concerns. Theme number 5 is on timely and efficient institutional support, and theme number 6 is on effective strategic communications. The general objective of the TRRP is to address the immediate and prolonged impacts of the pandemic on tourism, with emphasis on capacitating workforce, sustaining businesses, and protecting vulnerable groups. It will serve as the agency's master plan in navigating the tourism industry in the next 3 years. Specifically, it aims to provide for the specific needs of stakeholders, ensure the continued operation of tourism enterprises, particularly the MSMEs, offer capacity building and skills enhancement for tourism stakeholders, and develop, along with other national agencies, projects and activities for vulnerable groups. As tourism is a labor-intensive industry that cuts across many sectors, we will make sure that the plan is inclusive and benefits all stakeholders and that no one is left behind. Part of the plan includes the preparation of the country for the reopening of tourism. But as the worldwide trend for tourism campaigns is to go domestic first, long haul later, the Philippines is also following the same path. We shall focus on domestic travel to jumpstart tourism in the country and begin to bring tourism livelihood back. Towards this end, we shall continue to make the safety and health of tourists and workers our utmost priority. We are closely coordinating with public and private stakeholders, and more importantly, the local government units, in preparing and assessing the readiness for the resumption of tourism activities. As soon as practicable, we will roll out campaigns which will include re-imaging of domestic tourism by offering tours and programs on niche markets, refocusing on health and wellness, farm tourism, dive, and community-based tourism with authentic experiential activities. We will pay particular attention to product development as we expect changes in consumer behavior and expectations. As talks about lifting travel restrictions surface, tourism ministers and organizations worldwide have agreed that defining the new normal would require close coordination among government, international organizations, the private sector, and health experts. Because safety and hygiene will become the new amenity, the Department of Tourism has issued the health and safety guidelines governing the operations of accommodation establishments under the new normal, indicating quite a number of significant changes in key areas and critical touchpoints. Separate sets of guidelines are also being prepared for other sectors such as MICE, tourist transport, and food and beverage. Under a new tourism landscape, the development of programs and stringent guidelines for a more sustainable and resilient industry must be treated not only with a keen eye, but also with compassion. The expectation of tourists on the products and services that will be provided post-pandemic, specifically on cleanliness and hygiene, will be very high, and these will have to be met to regain confidence in the market. It is therefore our obligation to meet, if not exceed, the expectations of our clientele. Recovery will be moderate and done in segments over a period of 2 to 3 years. It will be slow, but with the innate resilience of the Filipino people and of the tourism industry, we are confident that we will recover. I believe that the Filipino spirit, with its adaptability and tenacity, will be the driving force that will help jumpstart the nation towards recovery. This, coupled with the carefully crafted programs under the Tourism Response and Recovery Plan and the cooperation of government and private sector partners, will help accelerate the rejuvenation of the tourism industry in the country. As Filipinos pull together, we will be able to rise from the challenges and come up with a better, stronger, and more resilient industry. Together, we will recover as one. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thanks, Son, for sharing with the audience the initiatives of the Department of Tourism to treat also our guests as family, most especially at the start of the quarantine in the Philippines. You also shared the tourism recovery program and the critical pillars. I just would like to ask about something about domestic travel because you mentioned that it will be the first market to recover. What specific, more or less, specific market segments of domestic travel do you think will recover first in the next 6 months?
Well, we see a lot of family travel kicking off the campaign. We will also see some movement from special interest groups, the dive groups, and we also see a lot of travelers who will be looking for outdoor experience. You know, people who will go trekking or mountaineering, people who have been cooped up in their homes for the last 2.5 months will look for outdoor activities. Many of them will be traveling by land, initially short distances, but as the confidence comes back, then they will start to travel longer distances and eventually start taking flights domestically.
Okay, thank you. And then international borders are still closed, but we see this year 2020 as our period to prepare for the recovery of the international tourism markets. What are our what market segments are we considering for the initial recovery of our international tourism industry?
For source markets, we're looking at the short haul source markets. So principally within ASEAN and of course our traditional markets from Northeast Asia, Korea, China, and Japan.
Okay, thank you very much, Undersecretary Bengson Jr. for sharing those insights. And then later we'll also ask you a couple more questions when we go to the panel discussion. Thank you very much, Undersecretary Bengson. Okay, allow me to introduce our third panelist, Ms. Natalia Bayona. She is the Senior Expert for Innovation, Digital Transformation, and Investments of the World Tourism Organization. Natalia served as the Vice President of International Development for the Spain startup South Summit. She organized the first South Summit Pacific Alliance, connecting the main stakeholders of the entrepreneurship ecosystem of Colombia, Chile, Mexico, and Peru. She is a professional in government and international relations from the Universidad Externado de Colombia and holds an executive MBA from IE Business School. Let us all welcome Ms. Natalia Bayona as she shares her insights on how innovation and digital transformation can help us in the new normal.
So, good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here today. Secretary, thanks a lot, Benito, and all the people from the Philippines that are hearing to us today, and of course to the Secretary General and my colleague Sandra. So, where we are and why we need innovation to recover tourism or to restart tourism. So, as you know, tourism has, and the world, sorry, has become 100% digital. As you know, and as Sandra said, 100% of the borders were closed for the first time in the world. And that is a strong challenge because we are still connected. Thanks to technology, we are here today, and we have the power to lead a new recovery on tourism. So, what we have seen inside the UNWTO regarding innovation and digital transformation is that there are like some pillars that we want to address regarding digital transformation. First of all, is working with entrepreneurs. And this is very important. When people ask me what challenges do I see regarding innovation and digital transformation thanks to COVID-19, I have to say that we have the same challenges. The thing is that COVID-19 has accelerated those challenges. So that's a good opportunity for everyone because, of course, working on digital would help to strengthen different skills in our tourism sector. So our pillars regarding innovation, the first one, as I already said, was regarding entrepreneurship and investments. So when we are talking about startups, we have seen that 10 years ago, the startup revolution came to change the way we were traveling. So that's why Uber was created, WeChat was created, etc. And nowadays, of course, they are top companies that have been scaling up from one country to the other, helping to spread the voice and making better the way we are traveling. Nowadays, as the Secretary General said, when we launch different challenges, we have seen that youth are working in order to develop a more inclusive digitalization. So when we see the projects that come to the UNWTO challenges, the startup competitions that we have made on gastronomy, on rural tourism, on the healing solutions to recover the tourism sector, the global startup competition, we have seen that there is a reality, not more a trend, about working together for a more inclusive world or a more inclusive tourism. So here is sustainability, everything related on social impact, to give back to the community, to help others to have a better experience, and of course to include the community inside the governments or the countries in order to make them part of the tourism sector is crucial today. So there was a challenge before COVID-19 that was how we can join efforts between startups that are small but that can scale up as WeChat or as Uber or Cabify, etc. How we can help those startups to grow working with corporates, with big corporates as airlines, travel agencies, tour operators, big hotel chains, etc. I have to say this is very important that when we saw the last startup and innovation guidelines or report from the World Economic Forum, we have seen that Asia Pacific was the first region of the world that have raised a lot of investments regarding entrepreneurship. And second of all, is one of the emerging regions regarding creation of new technologies. So I here see a really specific opportunity, because if we join those efforts between young people that are creating new technologies, new way to travel, new way for hotels to be more sustainable, new ways for airlines to test and to have health protocols in a linear way and not in a bureaucratic way, we are not only joining efforts for a better tourism, we are giving opportunities to youth, and we are giving opportunities to the whole tourism chain to get added value. So that's the first thing that I think there's a strong challenge regarding how we can help entrepreneurs to connect with those big corporations. Second of all is regarding education. As you know, digital education was crucial before COVID-19, but nowadays it's not crucial. Nowadays it's a must. It's not a nice to have. So, as you know, all the schools were closed, the universities were closed. So during these times, everything became digital. So that's why gaining new digital skills in tourism are crucial, because of course, gaining how to create a digital platform, how to create a good website, how to interact and to create chatbots, to instead of developing traditional conferences or traditional radio programs. So if we scale the way we are working and we are gaining skills, of course, the better, because we will lead by example in the sector. We have the UNWTO Online Academy, that is the place where we are bringing top universities of the world uploading content. Lucky us, we are working with the MIT, with PolyU from Hong Kong, with Cornell University, with Universidad Católica de Chile, Externado de Colombia, that are the top universities from Latin America, from the world, Le Roche in Switzerland. And during this autumn, we will have, today we only have some courses that of course you can go there, they're free of charge. And the Secretary General for in the next regional commission for Asia Pacific will bring some scholarships for the region. But instead of that, of course, I encourage you to visit not only the UNWTO Online Academy platform, where you can gain skills from the best institutions regarding tourism, but of course, now it's really easy to get educated. So you can go to Google or to YouTube and just ask yourself about a passion you have, how to cook, how to travel to another place, how to use virtual and augmented reality to go to your museums. And That's a different way, but we are traveling digitally, and that's really, really, really important. So that's the second challenge, or the second message that I have for today. And the third message is about investments. This is crucial. When we see venture capital investments or investments on innovation, we see that investors are really committed to see teams are projects that are giving back to the community. So when they are analyzing or doing due diligence of different projects, they analyze the two projects. So if they see that I have a project in the Philippines that is quite the same as other, but that other has social impact, has benefits for the community, etc., that project will gain a lot more than the traditional one. So we have to rethink the way we are developing business models in our countries. That's why we have developed, and today we have the honor to launch this program at 3 p.m. Madrid time with the IFC. As you know, the IFC is the International Finance Corporation, the biggest private corporation to help, in this case, hotels. So we are launching a project on green and sustainable investments. Why? Because if we want to recover tourism, we need to encourage the private sector to invest in sustainability. So today, we are opening the floor to certificate the most number of hotels of the world. It doesn't matter how big or how small you are. If you go inside the IFC UNWTO project specialized on green investments and you get the certificate, that certificate can allow you to go to a national bank in the Philippines that has an alliance with the World Bank, with the IFC, and you can have either a loan or an investment from those banks, zero interest for those hotels that comes from the UNWTO certificate, and that would help, of course, the hotels to work on renewable energies, to develop big data platforms to take better decisions, to work on social impact, to bring together better conditions to their employees, etc. So that's why we're talking today about how innovation is crucial and has to be our new normal. As Benito said, we are planning the new normal, but to us, innovation and sustainability is our new normal. Before COVID-19, it was, of course, a trend, it was important. But today, I think it's mandatory to innovate. And it's not only innovation about being digital, it's innovating about creating new processes, about including new type of people, by including the best experiences the Philippines has to offer something different, something really curated, with a micro segmentation in marketing to promote those experiences that maybe in the past we didn't do them because, of course, we had another normality. So we thought that promoting always the same was good because it was profitable to us. So that these are like the 3 points that I wanted to address today. And of course, we are working really hard inside the UNWTO. What is coming next? This is very important, and I would like to encourage all of you to join the innovation programs. We are planning to do, as I already said, today is the launching we are launching the investment program. On mid-July, we are developing a global sustainable development goals startup competition. So I invite all entrepreneurs to join us. I invite, of course, the secretary and Benito to help us to spread the voice with all the databases of the people that are innovating in the Philippines, to work on a more inclusive, a more innovative, and a more sustainable sector. We are working with the ICC, that is the UN Agency on Technology, to develop new technologies for our member states. We are updating the online academy, as I already said, with 5 more universities for this fall. We are working with Google to develop an acceleration program for our member states on digital skills, and to help our member states to have more digital skills to take better decisions. And of course, this is not only my job as the head of innovation, this is the job that we are doing together in the UNWTO as a team. So Sandra is part of this project as well. A lot of people behind are working because, as I already said, our aim now is to promote a more inclusive, a more innovative, but of course, a more sustainable tourism for everybody. So thanks again. And I'm really pleased to be here today.
Thank you very much, Natalia, for all those exciting news and developments about digital transformation. Now, I will ask you some questions later after Mr. Jesper Palmqvist has presented his insights about the hospitality industry and the trends that are happening right now. So I'll see you in a while during the Q&A segment. Okay, so now I'd like to call on Mr. Jesper Palmqvist, the Area Director for Asia Pacific of STR. STR is a co-star company that tracks historic and future supply and demand data for the hospitality industry. And they provide valuable market share analysis for global and investment companies and agencies as well across the globe. He is based in Singapore and leads STR in Asia Pacific. Right now, his focus is to make sense of the industry recovery from COVID-19 while assisting his daughters in remote learning during lockdown. Okay, Jesper, it's your turn.
Thank you very much indeed, and good afternoon from Singapore. Thank you, UNWTO, and of course, Philippines Department of Tourism for providing this platform, and everyone for tuning in Philippines and beyond. So, I have a few slides to show, and there's some data and thoughts on recovery that I want to go through. And on my first one is the only boring reminder I have, really. So on the next slide, I'll show you. It's a short, all our data comes directly from hotels, and we are trusted with this proprietary information for over 35 years. We will not advise on pricing strategies. So I ask anyone with questions on that, that's not for us. We provide numbers as facts for hotels, governments, investors, etc. for these actionable insights. Now, next slide has a map with a lot of colors, and it's really something we've been tracking a lot lately. It's closed hotels around the world. And the good news is that this was all red almost a few weeks and months ago. And it's changed now. So up until May 31st, you see even green, you have the color code at the lower bottom left level. We're seeing domestic corporate business as well in China. So otherwise, this is changing. So what does that do to the occupancy as well on the next slide? Well, basically, you're starting to see a little bit of a movement up. And why are there two numbers for each region? Well, we as a company who work with this data, we had to see a new way of looking at the numbers, because you look at Europe, 16% occupancy in that week, last week, or 5%. It depends on if you factor in all the closed hotels, because there are so many closed. So when you factor in them, you have 5% occupancy in Europe. And remember, Spain and Italy and all those markets have so much closed yet to open. North America, less so, and they're kind of coming back. But the difference in China, as you see, is almost nothing because hotels have reopened. And in Asia, there's a very mixed picture, which I'll get back to in a second. Now, to show you that on the next slide, I do want to call out one difference. And when you look at the journey throughout the last few months, so these eyeballs of recovery, as we call them, they represent a month each. And every single dot is a market in Asia Pacific. And obviously in February, all those red dots are Chinese markets. And in other markets, it hadn't happened yet, the downturn. And you have some green dots. This moves gently over the March, April. What has happened now is that the red dots in China have been replaced by some other markets. And we're starting to see those green shoots on the outer circle. Now, the whole purpose of this chart is just to show that the fall was quick, but the recovery is much more gradual. And that is very evident in the next slide when you see China, right? You may have seen this elsewhere, how the Chinese market dropped so quickly at 90%. And it's important to realize that the 2 months, February and March, were very slow, just really grappling with the virus and coming back. And then you see normal patterns of weekday, weekend in stage 3, up to 50%. This means you're starting to see real demand. It's no longer just isolation business or quarantine business. It's actually real paying guests in hotels, which everyone is just really keen on seeing again. So that's happening, really what's driving it. Now, let's go to ASEAN on the next section here and look at, there is obviously no real occupancy to speak of generally in the market yet, right? These three are 3 examples on different approaches. And I think that's important to look at because we'll see many variations coming out of it. And there's a lot for Philippines to study how they handle it. In Thailand, big tourism dependence and reliance, of course, in terms of GDP. The majority is inbound, and a lot of that comes from China. So their way of dealing with it was the virus was hard restrictions, curfews, and closed hotels, which leads to zero occupancy and low occupancy, and now looking to slowly reopen here in June and onwards. Singapore, which is over 90% about inbound or transit, right? So we have no domestic market in this small country, of course. But we have in the last few weeks had the highest occupancy in the world. Now that is entirely isolation and quarantine guests, as you've seen with the rise in cases, and that will go away. So Singapore will reboot slightly slower because of not having a domestic market, relying on those travel lanes and travel bubbles. And then we go to Philippines, which has such a strong domestic tourism, right? And now you have a variation of restrictions if you move through March and April and May, and that occupancy, which is considerably higher than many other countries, is supported by the initiative to support the BPOs, repatriated people, the medical frontliners, extended stay people. All those people have built up, so you see an occupancy. Singapore and Philippines stand out in the ASEAN world in terms of occupancy. So let me give you a quick look back then on Philippines occupancy and ADR on the next slide. Basically, if you look in the last few years, occupancy has been stable at a national level at about 70%. The graph in purple shows that average daily rates, or the rates in the hotels, have grown in the last 10 years about 20%, great signs, and it's been mostly in the last 2 years. That's a combination of both how generally in the market rates have been pushed up, and there's been a good year, 2018 above all, but also more high-end properties opening, for instance, in Makati and in Manila generally. So that's happened. In the next slide, you see 2020 so far, as you know, obviously you look at the first 4 months, that looks very dire, but it's actually comparatively well because of the reason I just mentioned. So to only be down 25% and only 12%, and those rates are down not so much for discounting, just for clarification, it's about the business mix. And then the last one on this particular section, next one, is the comparison to 2019. Where should we be by now if we had normal demand? Well, about 65% over this time period in the Philippines, and we're now about that 50. So when we go to recovery factors, you look at what have we seen so far on the next slide on what has happened, not only in China, but in other markets as well. I think you've all seen the first four. That's kind of common knowledge now. It's going to be domestic and local, etc., and what people are comfortable with. The interesting part is on the next section. Corporate business, it's not necessarily way down the line, and that's all it happens. We see already that early shoots will come much earlier than we thought in business that is approved by government, and then smaller business that are allowed in certain regions in some countries. And I think because the size and the variation in Philippines, we could see that here too. And that's true for group. But I think in the group business, it's important, and MICE in general, is I think everyone agrees we're looking at smaller events, hybrid events, where technology will be important. Maybe you have 5 people online in one room, in a hotel, in a meeting room, and the rest are spread out digitally and in a hybrid solution. So I think there are great options for that to come. And then international is way down the line. Philippines is unique because you can create these travel bubbles and links within the country and see which regions are safer and better equipped to do so. So I think we'll see some of that as well. To give you a couple of examples in 2 slides after this, are we seeing any business on the books? So any future bookings? This is Australia, Melbourne and Sydney. 2 markets as an example that are coming out. They're dealing with the virus pretty well so far. We're not seeing much bookings on the books. The confidence is not yet there, but it is coming. In June now, already in the first few days, we're starting to see things happen. In New Zealand, they had 60% occupancy over the long holiday as they are making progress. So I'd expect this to start picking up as well. The next example is from Europe on the next slide. In Europe, you will see 20% in that red line, 5 key markets, nothing is really booked for the rest of the year, right? And not even over peak summer. The confidence is not yet there. Now, Germany, Austria, Netherlands are starting to see, but when you say Europeans come into Philippines, I think first there is that confidence to be able to book these short haul stays. And we're not seeing that just yet, just from a timely perspective. So next one is about a little bit on the recovery factors. What do we have? What is particular to the Philippines? Because every country has their own. If I start at the bottom, just talk about the short term. After beating the virus, Philippines has this powerful domestic tourism engine. You got the beaches, the locations and products that are often good for social distancing. Not everyone has that, right? So inherently, it's possible to reboot that way. Obviously, these conversations, the support from government is so important since it's so important to the GDP of the country. I suppose on the flip side, you can say distances mean that flights are more essential. There's less drive too, which increases the complexity. And potentially the wonderfully young demographic of Philippines is something that could do something as well with less wealth. Now, the midterm here is just, you look at Korea and China, how that supplies majority of the inbound tourists. That's good. Those two markets are coming out of the virus sooner, as that could supply a potential bridge. Now, maybe you need to diversify arrivals, since together with the US, that's 2/3 of the international visitor arrivals. Long term, finally, it's so easy for me as a neutral person to see the potential. So many people are yet to discover the Philippines. Only, what is it, 10 million arrivals compared to that huge over 110, 20 million domestic visits. It can happen quick to grow the arrivals. Vietnam and Japan did that in just a few years, from low to huge numbers. So now it's about, not next year, what can I do in the 2020 to capture and get ready? There is one flag. Rebooting a nation financially obviously takes longer than what people think. A couple of impact consequences on the next slide. I think a lot of people now talk about cleaning. It was obviously important before all this to have clean hotel rooms, but the guest safety and certainty, being confident about those areas, rooms being safe, is critical. China has done that well so far, and I think we might see some things out of that. It's preparing for being ready. Buffet kind of suffers from an obvious flaw, I suppose, during the virus outbreak. Opens that question of the cost versus a la carte and guest expectations. But personally, I then think, well, hang on. If people go to the grocery shop and how many hundred people touch that fruit and there's no regulation on that, why should hotels be regulated for a bread basket? I think finding the consistency where the hospitality and the tourism industry gets treated the same way is an interesting topic coming up as well. Now, in terms of the last point, all these big MICE properties, the demand, they are going to compete way more with product that they didn't do before. So that's another thing that would happen. Next slide talks about a big topic that we will see again. Financial distress is very unfortunate, but we've seen it in the past and we expect it now. It's very topical, given the request from the Secretary Romulo Payat as well for stimulus package. Hotels don't go away when there's a drop in numbers. They're very hard as a resort to make into something else. It makes sense financially to open and continue. But if you can't pay the leases, you can't pay the debt, these discussions with these questions that I'm listing here will start to happen. And that's where it's important to have that scorecard to reach the fourth and the final question. Do I need to keep going? Do I sell or change my mind? If you don't have an explanation, that's the biggest mistake you can do. So my final slide is really, I ask myself some questions and then I answer them. That makes it a bit easy. So on the final part is really, what's going to recover first and why? I think we're waiting for the next slide, please. Thank you. So now we all know that what recovers first, like we said, domestic, local, accessible, but it's also about the design and space and potentially the value. There is a smaller share of wallet coming out of this, but corporate will come as well. This includes these great domestic potential travel bubbles, not necessarily the international ones. I mean, Vietnam is open up, it's ready to go, but with whom? So we need to make sure that those regulations and protocols are done very quickly. When are we back to 2019 levels? Well, this is a really tough question, obviously, but we do forecast, and economy being hit this big, when the economy is hit, it takes time. We first felt 2019 levels will come back in 2022. Our forecast now is 2024. 2024. So that's a long time and sounds scary. But what I'm saying is that by 2022, we'll see occupancies very close to 19, but rates usually lag after that. So the economy just does that. If you have a big domestic market, which you do in the Philippines, you'll ramp up a little bit quicker than others. Profitability, well, it's a harsh reality, not RevPARs and performance, but profitability takes longer. Like after the financial crisis, cost increases at a different pace after the financial crisis. And finally, what will change? Now, restrictions are gone. We have standards in place, stimulus package rolled out, hotels are reopening and flights. Right. I know we're all dreaming about it. What do we end up with? Well, there's going to be a hole in the state coffers, right? So there's going to be taxpayers. It's going to cost a lot of money to come back from this. That's just a fact. We'll have delays in the pipeline. There's about 15,000 new rooms planned in the Philippines. Some of them will be delayed and some will be abandoned. Not too many abandoned, I still think, over the long term. Some assets will shift. We'll see some changes in who owns which properties. You'll have these health and safety measurements in place, but I think people will accept them. Remember 9/11, if it's, everyone now is aware of how, bringing the liquids on board and not, and everything, and taking shoes off sometimes. So that people are going to get used to whatever changes we come up with. And MICE will shift to smaller and more online. But potentially and hopefully also, to have a positive note, because I know this is obviously a lot of negative news, a targeted approach where you work together, the plan in place when you're ready to go, centrally and by operators around the country. And now, or yesterday, is the time to get ready. The right metrics to measure it is absolutely critical in that structure. Because what won't change? Well, not knowing is a bad excuse. You need some kind of scorecard. Tourists will return, old ones and new ones, because the Philippines is way too good for that not to happen. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention and for tuning in and for the opportunity.
Actually asked already most of the questions that we all would want to answer in this discussion. So I will ask Natalia just one question, and maybe you can answer it in a minute. How do we address the fears of travelers related to security of their information, given that innovation now is more of an obligation rather than just an opportunity?
Yeah, thank you so much. Basically, as I already said, obligation is a strong word, no? More than obligation, I think it's our commitment that is different. And of course, it's an opportunity. So when you are committed on innovation, of course, you are developing public policies to help entrepreneurs to grow. When you have commitment on innovation, if you are a CEO of a good company or of a big company, you realize that you have to change your models, not only about technology, but also about the way of doing things. When you are talking about commitment on innovation, it's about bringing technology for good, to spread the voice massively, to get the people that doesn't have access to digital skills or to online platforms, neither to Wi-Fi, to get access to those mechanisms or tools to be a better professional. So to me and to the UNWTO, today it's a strong moment to talk about innovation as a commitment, but of course it's part of our new normal. And of course, the most innovative we are on this sector, the most opportunities we will have to lead by example in other sectors and to recover confidence, trust, and of course the tourism economy as soon as possible.
Thank you very much, Natalia. Sandra, very briefly, what mid-haul or long-haul markets will likely be interested to go or to travel to the Southeast Asian market post COVID pandemic? This is a question actually from one of the participants, Mr. Jerry Panga.
Well, I think as Benito and Jesper mentioned, mostly of the interregional market, I think it's important to have into account that in all regions, around 80% of your demand will always come from your region. In your case, Korea, Japan, and China are obviously very important markets, but I think there's also others which maybe at this point, maybe in a similar epidemiological situation, that might be opportunities to diversify. As it was mentioned, Thailand, Vietnam. I think the important thing is to keep the information, as it was mentioned as well, have clear market intelligence and information coming from the market on how it is behaving, what they're looking for, and have very clear information for tourists. I think as your point was, the question that you had before on how do you provide confidence. If I go to the website of the Philippine tourism, I need to be clearly said what am I expected in terms of rules and regulations? Where can I travel? And in terms of the tour operating, I think the cancellation policies will be critical. We're seeing that everywhere. So it's worthwhile keeping all those KPIs being watched in the different markets. Some research shows that for the moment, people are still afraid because they don't know, what if I get sick on my travel? Who takes care of me? What if I get sick at the destination? And I think, for example, Benito showed how the Philippines took care of the tourists. I think that's a very powerful message. I think that's worthwhile to echo, saying that, if something happens, we're here for you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. We don't have much time anymore for this panel discussion. It has been a very interesting set of presentations and insights shared to our industry stakeholders and here in the Philippines and also abroad. And we look forward to future webinars such as this with the Philippine Department of Tourism. So in synthesis, I just would like to highlight actually 4 letters related to the insights that you shared. The word RISE, R-I-S-E. R for resiliency, that has been the common theme. I for innovation, S for sustainability, and E for equity. So the inclusivity is very much at the central or at the pillar of our economic recovery. So with that, I'd like to conclude our discussion, and I would like to invite Secretary Bernadette Romulo Puyat for her closing message. Thank you.
And World Tourism Organization, especially to His Excellency Zurab Pololikashvili for granting our request in co-organizing this webinar and for joining us today despite his very busy schedule. And to our colleagues in the UNWTO Regional Department of Asia and the Pacific Deputy Director Harry Wang and his team for their unwavering support and assistance to the Philippine Department of Tourism for the successful implementation of this activity. We also give our big thanks to our very able speakers, Ms. Sandra Carvao and Ms. Natalia Bayona of the UNWTO and Mr. Jasper Palmchrist of STR for the invaluable insights, timely updates, and new learnings which they have shared with us. And of course, to our moderator, Dr. Maria Sherlyn Rodolfo, for brilliantly facilitating the discussion this afternoon. One thing that this pandemic has taught us is for us to keep on moving forward. Time and again, we keep on mentioning how the tourism industry is greatly struck by this crisis, but this is just one of the many other challenges that we are about to overcome. We must work hand in hand to make a Philippine tourism industry that is resilient and sustainable. And I must say that we are on the right track with the crafting of the Tourism Response and Recovery Program with the assistance of the Tourism Congress of the Philippines and the numerous consultations and dialogue with various tourism associations in the development of the new normal protocols for tourism-related enterprise. To this end, I am optimistic that we will rise above this crisis as one. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Maraming salamat at mabuhay po kayong lahat.